Hello, my name is Ben Slee and I am from Hector Abrahams Architects and the University of New South Wales. When I sat in Ulladulla last summer, surrounded by and cut off by raging bushfires, with no power, fuel, telephone or food, contemplating at what point we and the hundreds of other trapped families would begin looting the supermarkets, I wondered why we, as individuals and as a society, find it so difficult to initiate meaningful change in the way we consume resources, and what we, as designers, could do to make meaningful change easier. This paper is a product of that investigation. The United Nations and Australian government scientists have said that we must reduce CO2 emissions by 7.6% or more, starting now and each year over the next 10 years in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. Last summer seemed pretty catastrophic, so what do they mean? The built environment, the way we occupy and construct it, is responsible for about 20% of Australia's CO2 emissions. In the UK, it is estimated that about 30% of the nation's emissions come from the built environment. Whether it is 20% or 30%, it is a significant proportion and an opportunity to make a significant difference. In the developed world, most buildings already exist. In Australia, the Building Codes Board estimate that about 98% of buildings already exist at the beginning of each year. The architectural science community and the building industry more broadly tend to focus on improving the performance of new buildings, the 2% built each year. This is interesting, but clearly does not tackle the huge reduction in emissions that must be achieved by the 98% of buildings that already exist. Let's conduct a brief thought experiment. Imagine taking the people out of the 98% of buildings that already exist. If we did that, those buildings would use no energy and no water. After a few years, they might become ruins, occupied by birds, animals and plants, enhancing the ecology of the city. But buildings are for people, and so we must find ways of engaging with people who use and operate buildings and their organisations to help them all reduce emissions. I have called these groups building communities. They are communities of people brought together by the buildings they inhabit. I argue that architects are in a unique position to help solve this problem and to help communities become genuinely more sustainable because of the architect's ability to embrace complexity, embrace the multifaceted nature of problems, and to integrate knowledge to solve social problems. The response must be social rather than technical or scientific, although it must incorporate both, because the solutions challenge the identity and self-esteem of individuals and of whole communities, and so elicit powerful emotional responses in opposition to them. If we are to create buildings and communities that are genuinely sustainable, we must engage with those building communities in a meaningful way to develop strategies that they are able and willing to implement. The relationship between people and their environment is at the heart of a sustainable response to climate change. We know from post-occupancy evaluation that new buildings regularly underperform their predicted performance. We also know that this is due to what Lehman and Bordas call the killer variable, the people who actually occupy, use and inhabit those buildings. We know from other studies that people can and will adapt to their environment, and that they will make allowances for discomfort if they perceive that they are in control and that the building is sustainable. the forgiveness factor. We know that technical solutions imposed on communities and people tend to fail, but that when the community is engaged and when individuals support each other, they can succeed. Gupta calls this the socio-technical response. We also know that improving efficiency is not the answer. Paradoxically, efficiency makes consumption more affordable and so leads to greater use. The Jevons paradox. Instead, we must reduce our emissions in absolute terms. We must learn to live well with less. To quote Herring, efficiency without sufficiency is counterproductive. The latter must define the boundaries of the former. This is an emotional challenge. The way in which we inhabit our buildings is intrinsic to our identity, the identity of the building communities we are part of. It is intrinsic to our sense of self and so our self-esteem. Change inevitably involves uncertainty and a fear of not being in control. If that change is imposed by experts, communities experience a sense of loss of control, and a loss of dignity. They have not been listened to. Not being heard is the equivalent of not being valued and appreciated. There is an alternative. Jeremy Till proposes a strategy that goes beyond the traditional ladder of participation to transformative participation. Following Till's argument, we must recognise that the contextual knowledge and expertise embedded in the building community, the expert citizens, and the abstract knowledge and experience of the expert, the citizen expert, and bring them together in a mutually empowering and transformative conversation. This is design thinking, the juxtaposition and conversation between the abstract and the contextual. I argue that this conversation enables us to share, exchange, and explore information together, to learn together as citizen experts, architects, and expert citizens, the building community, and develop solutions that work to tackle the need to radically reduce emissions and work for the building community. Till calls this the negotiation of hope. Architects can help building communities understand and interpret hard data from sensors, and then construct social networks and technical and social strategies to respond constructively and collectively to what we have learnt together, to adapt, to take advantage of and embrace the forgiveness factor, the mutual support offered by the building community. As architects and as design thinkers, we must use our wide range of skills and understanding to mediate between the technical, the social, and the emotional in order to facilitate fundamental and radical change. The relationship between people and their environment is at the heart of a sustainable response to climate change. Thank you.